added agenda item this evening is item 9, and that is to, here we go. All right, let's see. So, this is called the Mayor Declaring Local Emergency in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic and Extending the Period of the Mayor Declared Local Emergency. Under Minnesota statute, a local emergency may be declared only by the mayor of a municipality, and the local emergency may not be continued for a period in excess of 3 days, except by or with the consent of the city council. Given the recent developments, the mayor is going to execute the declaration of a local emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. While the city already has emergency authority under the governor's declaration as well as the president's, the mayor's declaration will confirm the use of our emergency management system, the ability to respond to the emergency outside normal channels, and may be helpful for future reimbursements due to expenses incurred as the result of this emergency. In addition, the declaration and consent resolution provides for the use of telephonic meetings under Minnesota statute. Requirements for holding a meeting via telephone or other electronic means include, there's four factors here. So we're looking to declare a local emergency in response to COVID-19, and we're looking for the council's authorization to consenting to the mayor's declaration of a local emergency. Mr. Brody, anything you want to add to that?
A couple items, and then I'm going to turn it over, kind of tag team it with Chief Wise, who is our designated official here at the local level for our emergency response plan. We've kind of talked about sort of the memo talks about sort of the legalities of this. It's a little bit unusual. It's usually if the mayor does issue a declaration, it usually comes just, at any point, and then the council meets a few days within those 3 days to meet. Here, given the time frame, and in some ways it's more efficient this way to have all our discussion in one day. I might have been a little presumptuous in saying the mayor's going to execute that. I presume the mayor's going to execute that. And that would be the first step. So if the mayor says, nope, then we don't need to get to the second discussion. If he does sign that, and I'd probably even have him sort of read that proclamation when we get to that point. And then once we're done with that, we can get into consideration by the council to whether they want to consent to continuing that proclamation. I will turn it over to Chief Wise to sort of say what we believe this proclamation of the local emergency will do and what benefits it can provide to the city, and the advantages of that. Because I think, on its face, you may say, well, we're already sort of doing these things, which we are. But I think, like I said, Chief Wise gives a pretty good explanation as to its importance.
All right, Chief Wise.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for you or for anybody who might be following along, we use the guidance of City Code 3-500 under emergency management. So if somebody wants to see some of the details, the way the ordinance was written, it might be helpful. Just to explain a little bit of background, obviously I work as the police chief. By policy, the city manager appoints an emergency management director. Our history is that the police chief serves in that role. And that would be regardless of this designation. It has been our history for a long period of time. The emergency management director continues to report to the city manager, and the city manager continues to respond to the desires of the council. That's the practical matter. Declaring a local emergency is really heavy sounding words. In reality, we're just talking about streamlining our administration. So the way it works as a practical matter, the governor has declared a state of emergency. My responsibility as the emergency manager is to carry out the orders of the governor, consistent with city policies and procedures. So I think the governor, the state of Minnesota in particular, has been a good example of how to do things the right way. I feel like we're on top of things here, both in the state, in our city. Specifically, however, by doing this or declaring this local emergency, streamlining would be, say, if we have to purchase items, we could go outside of the normal bidding process. And frankly, more importantly, the thing that I guess that I would say that I'm most concerned about, or the most beneficial thing by declaring a local emergency is, this is obviously is new territory for all of us. My experience is related to disasters. Typically, we're talking about floods when we talk about emergency management, or a tornado or something like that. And in order to get federal funds from the Federal Emergency Management Agency after a disaster has been completed, declaring a local emergency is usually a requirement. The FEMA requires you had done that and that you'd follow your progression through the state of Minnesota, and that in the end, the federal government will reimburse the city for its costs in addressing this emergency. Frankly, the way things stand right now is I don't expect there to be a significant expense to the city of Coon Rapids unless employees start getting sick on a widespread basis that might cause overtime to be able to provide continuity of services to our citizens. That matter, we were working very hard to make sure our employees don't get sick, especially our emergency responders, and we're taking aggressive action to keep that from happening. This social distancing that we're talking about is a big part of that. The other thing that the city attorney and I talked about is the ability of you to meet telephonically. I think we need to set an example and keep our social distance. And that would be a good way for the council to show leadership in saying that we agree with the idea that we're going to do all we can at the front end of this virus incident and try to model good behavior. Because frankly, we're asking our citizens to do much the same. The city of Coon Rapids will continue to operate all functions. However, we're going to want the citizens to try to stay at a distance. So for instance, City Hall itself for functions other than police and fire will be closed to public access, but that said, we're going to keep doing the functions that we're able to do. We just want people to do it by phone. So we're just going to try to think outside the box and get everything that needs to get done to keep our economy moving, to keep as much working as we possibly can. But just to have people appreciate that we're trying to not get sick and we're trying to not get other people sick. That's our primary goal. So we think this declaration, like I said, I can't emphasize it enough. It sounds really dire and heavy, the words, but in reality, we just want to be able, for instance, we're talking about purchasing laptops for employees to be able to work remotely. We have some, but we maybe need some additional. We would just like to do that outside of the normal procedure for getting them. So we're not talking about significant expenses in that regard. So I don't know, I had a bunch of notes, but I'm open to
All right.
questions because I'm
Chief
guessing you
Wise,
might have a bunch.
Mr. Brody, do you have something to add
I
there?
just had one follow-up. You know, one thing we're working on, and we think we have it there on the technology on the meeting, what we're also concerned about is, hey, this is a public forum here, and we want the opportunity, and I think we're gonna try to have that opportunity where people can participate during the meeting, the public can, and in some cases, it's gonna be required if we have a public hearing for whatever reason. And obviously, it's our hope that maybe by April 7th, things are better. But we also want to be prepared if things are not. And so I think we're getting that technology, it's already in place. We're able, probably theoretically, even to conduct this meeting tonight by telephonic ways where people can participate outside of the council. And so I think that's another key piece that's there that we, have put into place. And so, and also, if we got City Hall closed, it is a little difficult to open it up for council meetings. And again, as Chief Wise, and we've been in constant contact with City Manager Mr. Stemwaddle, that, our goal is we still want to provide services to the public. It's our obligation, for one. It's going to change a little bit over these next few weeks, and it may be a few bumps as we try to figure out how to do that for some of our services. But obviously, our core ones we're going to continue to maintain. Police, fire aren't going to change. Water, those kind of core ones are going to be there, and we're going to get some of the other little details figured out. But like I said, we're in constant conversation on that piece, and so that's, like I said, where we're at right now. And as Chief said, we're open to questions. Mr. Himmer would be as well to his operation as well.
Yeah, and it's important that we maintain that service to the residents and that we support our staff. And I think we would look kind of tone deaf when the Blaine City Hall and the other city halls are all locking down, and so that encouraging the phone access to try and keep their staff healthy and keep everybody healthy. I think we would look kind of tone deaf if we didn't lock down. Councilmember Demmer.
Yeah, so, with a national state of emergency and a state state of emergency, in some respects, it seems very obvious that we should call one, but it's also something probably none of us have ever voted for, so it is very appropriate, and thank you for asking for us to ask some questions, because you know. So first one is, how does it end?
It will either end, we can take action here as a council to end it. It would end automatically upon the governor ending any state of emergency. So either of those two options.
Okay. I guess one thing I was considering is whether we set a limit by which we have to reauthorize it. I'm not saying we have to, because if I didn't realize it ended because the governor ends the state one, so that helps.
That would be one way, and then, or like I said, we can come back and do it ourselves as well.
Yeah, a reauthorization is one option, just to make sure it isn't as indefinite, but I assume that as long as the state's in state of emergency, we'll probably need to be as a part of the metro.
And if,
The second thing, and I'm positive this is the case, but just want to make sure it was said out loud. Any of the purchasing that was done without normal authorization channels would still be public record and would still have
Oh, yeah.
post-event oversight. So just to make it clear to everyone at home, this is not an attempt to do things and hide them at all. It all is in the sunlight. And then third, we still will have city council meetings. And so for things that would not be emergency purchases, like, for example, this roof discussion, if this had happened after the state of emergency had been declared, you wouldn't just do it because there wasn't an emergency relation. We would still hold the regular votes for things that weren't time critical.
you got it. I mean, that's, regular business will be conducted. We'll have council meetings like we regularly do. They may look a little different, but they're gonna be, all of us will be present for them in some fashion, somewhere. And like I said, it's our hope that there will be ability for the public to participate in that as well.
And then I'd like to encourage us that we don't try to go live with the two-way meeting in a city council meeting. I don't know how we can test it while not violating open meeting laws, maybe test it with 3 people that are on the council or something, and then have somebody who's not on the council
Sure.
try to reply in, but please don't make it the first time we've tried it.
That'll be our hope as well. And again, to be clear, nobody's gonna be sitting in this room when we conduct that meeting.
Right.
Or unlikely that anybody will be sitting in this room.
And so your idea of trying to make sure people can participate, that's going to be an interesting challenge to that system that we'll definitely want to try out heavily before we open it up.
And we've already seen some from other cities who've done this already, and so there's
Good.
different ways, and we're hoping to have sort of again, we're in sort of our uncharted territory, as somebody mentioned, and so, but we're still hoping to have some sort of, I don't know if best practice is gonna be quite the right word, but have at least some options and hopefully be able to pick the best one.
And I think only one other thing, but as I was taking a look at the whereases, arranging for performance of public work, contracting, incurring obligations, employing temporary workers, renting equipment, purchasing supplies, materials, complying with limitations on tax levies, and appropriating funds. The employing temporary workers one struck me as one that seemed like one of the likely ones. So in the event that we need expanded ability to respond to 911 or something like that, I'm assuming that's the most likely use of that?
Yeah, Councilmember Denver, I can give you a perfect example from the county public health is, they contracted with recently retired public health employees to come back to work to enhance their strength. So that's a really good example of something that could potentially happen.
Okay. And normally we go through a pretty thorough vetting process, and I'm trying to always walk the line here between our normal process and the emergency process. Hiring a police officer without that vetting would be a difficult decision. I just wanted to see if you could walk us through how you'd make sure you'd get a good temporary person to do those sort of calls.
Sure, Councilmember Denver, frankly, I don't see that being even on the radar at all. Our staff is young and healthy as a whole. If they were exposed to the virus, we would expect that they would be away from work, they would heal, and then they would return to work. And so the way things are in Anoka County, we have mutual aid agreements. We've talked with the other police chiefs and the sheriff in the county, and so if one department happened to have more sickness than another, is that mutual aid compacts would kick in and then we'd support each other. Frankly, I can't imagine there being a need to expand our staff. If that should become a need, it'll be apparent to everybody. It'd just be common sense because it would be something that would be widespread. But we have our planning is, our worst-case scenario planning is for a third of our staff to be down sick, where they're not able to work, and that we can function on a third of our staff. It just might cost more overtime, but it wouldn't be different human beings.
I guess the one thing I would consider is that when breakouts occur, they tend to break out in regions. So if a lot of our staff was sick, chances are a lot of Blaine's would be sick too. It might be worth exploring with people from regions that weren't directly neighbors. So whether there's a Duluth, some groups that maybe would be able to come if there was a lot. And again, we're talking third issues here, but just something to consider before things get bad, or, in case things got bad, right?
So noted.
I think I can still find my uniform.
Young, healthy.
Except you're one of the risk carriers.
Mr. Brody?
The only thing I want to add is obviously these are very fluid situations. It was, I think, last Thursday that the NCAA called off the basketball tournament. That seems like a lifetime ago in some respect. I'm sure some will say, are we overreacting? I guess we don't think we are. We think we're being, I think Chief Wise pointed out, we're just trying to keep our employees safe. We're trying to keep our citizens safe. We're trying to, I guess, flatten the curve, if we're going to use that kind of terminology. And so we just think these are additional steps to allow us to do that. And frankly, we believe we're carrying out the governor's orders, and so that's our goal here.
Your Honor, might I just dovetail off of that just briefly? Sure. I want to give the public a little bit of an insight into how, frankly, remarkable the community that we live in is. It was back on January 22nd when there was a meeting of the Joint Law Enforcement Council, and Chief Wise and Councilmember Wells are the representatives of the Joint Law Enforcement Council. And the topic of what was then called just the Wuhan coronavirus didn't even have the COVID-19 label to it, was brought up at that meeting. Within a couple of days, there was a Fire Protection Council meeting. Now, this is important to know what these things are, because Joint Law Enforcement Council is a meeting of the sheriff, the county attorney, and all the chiefs of police in the entire county. And so they were having a conversation about the community and their departments and their cities at that point in time. A couple days later, the fire chiefs are having a similar conversation at their point in time. It was then in late January that the topic was raised at our workshop to ask our staff to look into communicating with the courts where necessary, look at the various departments, and that has been a day-by-day gradual progression to get ready for the place where we are here today. I can tell you, in contrast to other surrounding communities, some of which I'm quite familiar with, we were so far out in front of this issue in comparison to other units of government that I have repeatedly reached out to, for example, Chief Piper with the fire department, and said, is there anything else that you feel you need? And they've just always been responsive to that and are working on it. And I also have reached out to the city manager, and I've reached out to other members on the council to get ideas from them. This declaration of emergency, which follows the governor's declaration, is a natural progression along that line. It is something that was contemplated as something that might be necessary going forward, and there may be other steps that are necessary to take. But I do want to say to staff and to the public at large, I really couldn't be more happy as to how our local units of government have looked at this issue, especially in comparison to others in the surrounding community. So I hope we all can support this and get behind it. I can tell you that I don't want it to last any longer than it's necessary. So I had the same thought when I read through it the first time. When is it going to end? Why is it indefinite? I can tell you why it's indefinite, because there's a comfort level with us that we're going to end it when the time is right. And it'll be a constant conversation that we'll be having, whether or not the governor ends it at a particular point in time, because I don't think any of us is reflected by the fact that we're here, want to do it this other way. We like interfacing with the public, And we like having these meetings in this forum as opposed to in the alternative forum. So I look forward to a time when we can return to this chamber and have business as usual in the city, but I intend to support this.
City of Ramsey just declared theirs.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Brody, do I need to read all this, or what do I need to do?
Maybe, I'm sorry.
It's the last time you're gonna be able to do it at a mic.
I'm not gonna make you come down
Knock
here like
yourself
you
out.
normally do with your proclamations.
All right, okay.
Mayor,
Councilmember Griscoviac?
before you read that, and I'll preface this by saying that the health and the safety of everybody, everyone on the city staff and our constituents is of the utmost importance, of course. And as the mayor, you have the authority to call this declaration of emergency at any time. It doesn't have to be tonight, and all that. And so my question is, we are, to Councilmember Johnson's point, we are very, very well prepared for this. All the way around. Prepared, we have the resources. We are not in a critical position right now. If we should get to a critical position, the mayor can certainly call the state of emergency, and then that actually invokes all of those special powers that are described, meeting remotely and all that. We have 3 days then to ratify it, to go on longer. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't really agree with this motion at this time, and the reason being, I think we all need to keep calm in the community. The federal government, the government declarations, the state, the county, and we're working within those parameters already that actually give us most of the powers that we would need in an emergency. So I guess my biggest thing here is that I would like to just instill a sense of calm, and we've got this under control regardless of state of emergency declaration at this time.
Well, and I concur as far as, I think everybody's been remarkably calm through this. I was in here on Friday afternoon and had a meeting with city manager, the city attorney, police chief, public works director, and everybody. I mean, everybody is so prepared for this. And I just think this is just the next step that we have to take to give them the tools they need to be able to react. If they need more computers, if they need whatever they need, I think they need to be able to make those decisions without calling us together to make a decision on it. I think that it's fluid, and I think that this gives them that authority. I also like the fact that if there's a way to get reimbursed for some of these things, the state of the emergency makes us eligible for that. So, Chief Wise, and then.
Mr. Mayor, and I'll tell you, that's really a key point, because we're already tracking costs, because we have had costs already directly related to this. So, for example, we have one police officer who had a exposure to a person of interest, meaning just a sick person, and we place that person on administrative leave. We're tracking that time that they're not working, but the employee is going to get paid, and that would be a perfect example of a cost we would like to be reimbursed for as a city, especially if the federal government gives us that opportunity. So in truthfully, I guess we just looked at it, it's better to declare and not need than to later need it and then come back to you and then have you date it retroactively. It just winds up to be, to me, it winds up being a paperwork thing. We've been lucky in Coon Rapids that we haven't had a significant flood in a long period of time. We had a rain event that we recovered some costs, but there are always administrative things that the federal government wants and needs and expects. And it's just nice to have all those T's crossed and I's dotted in advance, and it makes it really tidy. And that's my perspective too, because I totally agree with Councilmember Griscoviac. Calm professionalism is what's required at this moment, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's heavy sounding language. I don't like the way it sounds either, because it feels like an overreaction when we're just talking about administrative stuff. But the reality is there'll be some accountant in Washington, D.C. that will say, where's your copy of your local declaration of an emergency? And then we come scrambling back to you to have you do one that's dated retroactively or something like that. That's the kind of thing that will happen.
Mayor?
Hang on, Councilmember Demmer, you had your hand up? Or did?
The biggest thing just counting the people in the room, even with the skeleton crew, and we're at 12. And we can't have 20 people show up and still be under 10. You know, I think that one of the things that this does is this allows us to do public meetings where we don't put a bunch of people in a room. And both the federal and the state response are asking people to limit, today's was limit to groups of 10. I don't know that it was absolutely necessary that you have to do an emergency declaration to do everything trans-telephonically. However, between the allowing people to contribute, allowing the open meetings, and the, quite frankly, if our next council meeting is 2 weeks away, in some countries, 3 weeks away, in some countries, things have gone very badly within a period of a week or two. So I do think the ability to react quickly is important. And again, I think that once the state's already declared the state of emergency, this is simply allowing our local groups to execute the state of emergency that's already been handed to them. So I would support it as is, and I would also ask that we all keep a close eye on when to end it.
Coming back to you, Councilmember Geisler.
Yeah, and I'll echo some of the other things that people are saying. And what I've been hearing and watching from the experts at the federal level, they all say speed is of the essence, not perfection. And the ability to have speed is the ability to say, okay, I need to do this, and the staff would be able to do that execution now versus saying, oh, okay, now I have to go get the mayor, have him declare something, and then get that speed can make a difference. And so for me to say, now's the right time to say, let's get things in place before there's something that they need to react to immediately and don't have the ability to do that. That's, to me, the key of why we start to do this and put things in place to make ourselves prepared and ready to be able to handle the things that come at us without having to go backwards and do administrative work.
And I agree wholeheartedly with Councilmember Geisler on that. I consulted with the National League of Cities today, and Mr. Brody, maybe you can clarify, but it is my understanding that a statewide declaration of emergency actually grants us as a municipality certain rules, suspended rules, such as the emergency spending, such as the ability to close our facility already without this next level. So can you confirm or?
I believe that probably is accurate. We've relied on state emergencies before, but I guess this is just to ensure, this is different. I mean, it has a different feel to it. We want to make sure that we have covered every possible angle that we can. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity, we could have an opportunity for some local control here. If we think that things can be done differently at a local level, we don't anticipate that. We generally follow what the state is recommending, but maybe there's something specific to us. And we don't talk about that much because that's not our intent. Our intent is to follow the lead of the state. But there may be some special particular piece here that maybe this will help us out in that. If we want to do something differently that's unique to us or we feel is important to us. And again, I'm not trying to put fear into anybody, and maybe in some ways we're just simply doing what we already have the authority to do, but I just think that it isn't going to hurt us in any fashion either. And like I said, the telephonic meeting is separate from that, and that needs to be, if we want to do that, we need to go forward. And it's the same rationale for both, so that's why they're put together.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and read this now.
I've changed my mind.
You can change your mind. What do I have to do?
If you just want to say that you're going to declare the emergency as so stated, I think we're comfortable with that. It's going to be, if it does go through, it'll be posted online.
All right.
Like I said, I just think that that's probably
Okay.
the best angle.
All right, so I guess I'm not, all right. Well, all right, so then I will, all right, so as the mayor, I am going to declare a local emergency in response to COVID-19 pandemic. And then we'll be looking What do you?
You've done it.
I've done it.
So
Okay,
now-
all right.
And then
I would
Mr.
just
Mayor?
note,
So now we've got 3 days.
If you
Oh,
want
no.
to bang, if you want to bang your gavel, you can.
Yeah. So, or I would say, Mr. Mayor, in
Councilmember
response
Geisler?
to that, I would make a motion to authorize resolution number 20-38, consenting to mayor's declaration of local emergency, extending the period of local emergency and authorizing certain actions.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Geisler, second by Kicker. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Griscovi.
I would just wanted to add another clarifying question for our
Yeah.
legal counsel
Sure.
here. And it's to Brad Weiss's question or point about costs being paid back by FEMA. Again, the statewide declaration of emergency, wouldn't that automatically enroll us for reimbursement from the federal level?
we believe so,
Okay.
but we're not, like I said.
All right.
This
And
one,
again, I just,
Your Honor.
we are-
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I mean, I know it's a very, very tough time that we're in, but I just want to instill calm. There's only been 60 people with the disease in Minnesota. I think many more than that are probably undetected and having mild symptoms. But I believe that a broad expansion, an emergency declaration at the city is not warranted at this time.
I don't think it's going to make a nickel's worth of difference to the people here if we declare this after the state and the federal government have already declared it, but that's just my opinion. Councilmember Wells.
I don't think it's an overreaction. It is dotting the i's and crossing the t's. And as a former emergency manager for the city, I know that we had to put in money individually, to FEMA. You do it as the city of Coon Rapids, and right or wrong, they're gonna be throwing around money from both the federal and state levels, and we need to document and get our piece of the pie, and this is important part of the process to do that.
Okay. Further discussion?
Your Honor.
Councilmember Johnson.
Councilmember Griscoviac brought up the League of Minnesota Cities. I would just note that they just closed their building as a result of COVID-19, but they also have out there COVID-19 peacetime emergency executive order, frequently asked questions. So they go through what is a peacetime emergency and what should a city do in response to the executive order. And the advice that the League of Minnesota Cities gives in response to that question is cities should follow their local emergency management plans and work with the state when requested. And then it goes on to explain various ways of doing that. Should our city still hold public meetings, city should review recommendations from the Minnesota Department of Health related to public meetings, look at the appropriate statutes, and go on. And then it follows the process. So there is a process that is laid out for this, and this declaration is consistent with that process. And I think it is not only recommended, but it's best practice. And one thing that the city has been doing since I indicated before, early in January, and frankly, many of the cities in Anoka County since early in January have been preparing for this moment. We all wish that we wouldn't have gotten here. I mean, I would have loved that, when it was, I believe it was 19 at one point in time, late last week, and now we're at 60. And so I think we are here for that point, and I intend to support it. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Griscoviac?
just a clarification. I did check with the National League of Cities and the Minnesota League of Cities, and neither one of them has a recommendation for municipalities to call a local state of emergency at this time. Now, I know there's cities across the country that have. There are pockets of, in New York, for example, it's really bad. So far in Minnesota, 12 of 853 cities have done so.
Okay, thank you. Any other, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes, one abstention, or one nay, one opposed. Councilmember Griscoviac.